Russia's Pokrovsk offensive has turned into one of the biggest operational disasters of the war. Between May 19th and May 26, 2026, Ukrainian forces executed a coordinated counteroffensive that trapped tens of thousands of Russian troops inside a shrinking pocket near Pokrovsk. What began as a Russian push toward a critical Ukrainian logistics hub became a catastrophic encirclement operation. Russian forces advanced too far, too fast, and without recognizing what Ukraine was preparing behind the lines. Now, entire Russian brigades have been shattered. Hey, I'm Natalie Voss. Welcome back to the channel. For those of you new here, we break down the Ukraine-Russia war through operational analysis, satellite imagery, battlefield reports, and casualty assessments. We focus on military strategy, not hype. And today, we're covering the Pokrovsk encirclement. Let's get into it. Pokrovsk is one of the most strategically important cities in eastern Donetsk. Before the war, it had a population of around 60,000 people. Today, most civilians have fled, but the city still matters because it controls critical road and rail infrastructure. For Ukraine, Pokrovsk is the final major logistics hub, supporting operations in large parts of the Donbass. For Russia, capturing it would have been a major operational victory. Since late 2024, Russian forces had been slowly grinding westward through settlements including Selidove, Hirnik, Nevelska, and Krasnohorivka. The offensive was costly, but Russian commanders believed they were building irreversible momentum. By spring 2026, Russian units were attempting to establish fire control over the supply roads leading into Pokrovsk. Their expectation was simple: isolate the city, exhaust Ukrainian defenders, and eventually force a collapse. But there was one major problem. Ukraine wasn't simply defending, it was preparing a counterstroke. Russian intelligence reportedly estimated roughly 40,000 to 50,000 Ukrainian troops operating in the wider sector. What they failed to recognize was that Ukraine had quietly positioned an additional reserve force behind the line. Mechanized brigades, assault units, drone teams, and electronic warfare formations were being moved into staging areas, while Russian troops remained focused on the frontal assault. That's the danger of attritional warfare. When an army becomes obsessed with grinding forward meter by meter, it can miss what is building behind the battlefield. Satellite imagery and open-source tracking throughout April 2026 showed gradual repositioning of Ukrainian armoured formations north and south of Pokrovsk. The third separate mechanized brigade relocated north near Drushkivka. The 15th Mechanized Brigade positioned south near Kurakove. Meanwhile, the 81st Air Assault Brigade operated as a mobile reserve, equipped with extensive drone and electronic warfare capabilities. Ukrainian planners spent weeks studying Russian movements, supply routes, command posts, artillery positions, reinforcement patterns. They identified the operational rhythm of the Russian offensive and waited for the moment when Russian units were fully committed. Encirclements are not spontaneous, they are prepared, and by mid-May, Ukraine was ready. On May 19th at dawn, the operation began. The opening phase was electronic warfare. Ukrainian jamming systems targeted Russian communications networks across the Pokrovsk sector. Battalion commanders lost contact with higher headquarters. Artillery coordination degraded. Air support requests became inconsistent or impossible. For hours, Russian units struggled to communicate effectively while Ukrainian assault formations advanced. According to battlefield assessments, Ukrainian electronic warfare systems specifically targeted the radio frequencies most commonly used by Russian command structures in the sector. Russian operators repeatedly attempted to switch channels. Ukraine followed them. The result was widespread disruption at the exact moment Ukrainian mechanized forces launched their assault. The third separate mechanized brigade attacked from the north. Using rapid penetration tactics and coordinated armoured assaults, Ukrainian forces broke through Russian screening positions and defensive lines near Drushkivka. The advance was fast. Within less than a day, Ukrainian units had penetrated deep enough to threaten the rear logistics routes, supporting Russian forces attacking Pokrovsk. Russian reserves attempted to respond, but degraded communications prevented effective coordination. Without reliable command and control, Russian artillery could not mass fires efficiently. Counterattacks became fragmented, and local commanders reacted independently rather than as part of a unified defense. At the same time, the 15th Mechanized Brigade attacked from the south near Krasnohorivka. This was the second arm of the pincer. Two Ukrainian mechanized formations were now advancing on converging axes toward key road junctions east of Pokrovsk. Russian units defending the southern sector, including elements of the 25th Motorized Rifle Brigade, faced the same communications breakdown affecting the northern front. The pressure intensified rapidly. On May 21st, forward elements of the northern and southern Ukrainian formations linked up near Mariivka. The encirclement was complete. Tens of thousands of Russian troops were now trapped inside the pocket. Initially, Russian high command appeared slow to grasp the scale of the disaster. Frontline commanders reportedly understood the situation before senior leadership fully processed the collapse. Once Moscow recognized what had happened, immediate orders were issued. Break the encirclement. Russian forces inside the pocket would attack north. External reserves would push south. The objective was to reopen the corridor before supply conditions deteriorated beyond recovery. On May 22nd, Russian forces launched a major breakout attempt. This was not a small local assault. Mechanized columns, tanks, artillery, and infantry formations were committed in large numbers. Russian commanders understood the urgency. Every hour mattered. Once ammunition, fuel, and medical capacity collapsed, the trapped force would become operationally crippled. But the breakout effort faced a devastating problem. The electronic warfare disruption was still active. Russian artillery coordination remained inconsistent. Forward observers struggled to relay target information. Air support could not be effectively integrated. The assault advanced with firepower, but without coherent battlefield coordination. Ukrainian defenders concentrated anti-tank systems, drones, and artillery against the advancing columns. Open-source footage released over the following days showed destroyed armoured vehicles spread across the attempted breakthrough routes. Analysts estimated hundreds of Russian vehicles were destroyed, abandoned, or heavily damaged during the failed assault. The casualties were severe. Thousands of Russian soldiers were reportedly killed, wounded, or captured during a single day of fighting. And most importantly, the breakout failed. That moment effectively sealed the fate of the encircled force. Russian high command reportedly considered rushing strategic reserves into the sector, but reserves require time. The trapped units did not have time. By May 23rd, operational degradation inside the pocket had become severe. This is an important military concept. Encircled armies do not simply run out of supplies, they deteriorate operationally. Ammunition usage must be rationed. Fuel shortages immobilize vehicles. Medical systems collapse. Communications weaken. Morale declines. Combat effectiveness drops rapidly. Reports from inside the pocket indicated Russian brigades were already reducing artillery expenditure because ammunition stocks could no longer be replenished effectively. Fuel shortages worsened. Vehicles that had been used aggressively during the offensive now lacked the diesel necessary for manoeuvre operations. Generators powering command posts and field infrastructure began shutting down. Russian commanders reportedly explored helicopter resupply operations. But Ukrainian air defences positioned around the encirclement made aerial resupply extremely dangerous. At least one attempted resupply helicopter was reportedly shot down. Further helicopter operations were reduced or cancelled. Meanwhile, Ukraine intensified drone strikes inside the pocket. FPV drones and reconnaissance systems hunted fuel depots, ammunition storage sites, and troop concentrations. Open-source investigators geolocated repeated strikes against Russian logistics positions trapped inside the encirclement. This was systematic operational degradation. Without ammunition, Russian forces could not sustain offensive combat. Without fuel, armoured units lost mobility. Without medical evacuation capacity, casualty rates became psychologically devastating. Morale reportedly collapsed rapidly. Russian military bloggers and battlefield-linked channels began describing severe panic among units trapped inside the pocket. There were reports of desertion, reports of troops surrendering, reports of officers losing operational control over portions of their formations. By May 25th, the Russian command faced an impossible choice: attempt another breakthrough and risk total annihilation, or retreat immediately before the encirclement tightened further. The decision was made. Russian forces would attempt withdrawal. Late on May 25th, surviving formations began pulling back toward the eastern corridor connected to the Donetsk-Pokrovsk highway. This was effectively the only remaining escape route. Ukraine anticipated it. For several days, Ukrainian artillery units, drone teams, and mechanized formations had been preparing withdrawal corridors as kill zones. Fire missions were pre-registered. Drone operators positioned along expected retreat routes. Mechanized units coordinated pressure to force retreating Russian columns into predictable movement patterns. What followed was devastating. Satellite imagery released on May 26th showed sections of the withdrawal corridor littered with destroyed vehicles, burned-out tanks, destroyed armoured personnel carriers, abandoned fuel trucks. Wrecked ammunition transports. Open-source analysts geolocated large concentrations of destroyed Russian equipment along the retreat routes. The losses were enormous. Several Russian brigades suffered catastrophic manpower depletion. Some formations reportedly lost close to half their combat strength. Others were effectively destroyed as coherent operational units. While exact casualty numbers remain disputed, independent assessments suggested total Russian losses during the encirclement and withdrawal may have reached into the tens of thousands killed, wounded, captured, or missing. And these losses matter for one major reason. Modern militaries can replace equipment faster than they can replace experienced soldiers. Russia can mobilize additional manpower, but experienced officers, trained NCOs, drone operators, artillery specialists, and combat veterans cannot be regenerated quickly. The Pokrovsk disaster may therefore have long-term consequences, far beyond this single battle. Russian casualty rates were already placing pressure on manpower sustainability before the encirclement. This operation dramatically accelerated those losses, and psychologically, the impact may be even larger. For months, the dominant narrative surrounding the war had increasingly favored Russia. Western analysts repeatedly argued that Ukraine was exhausting its manpower reserves, losing equipment faster than it could replace it, and gradually being forced into a defensive posture. Pokrovsk challenges that narrative. This operation demonstrated that Ukraine still possesses the ability to coordinate large-scale mechanized operations involving electronic warfare, drones, maneuver warfare, artillery integration, and operational deception. That is significant, because operational encirclements are among the most difficult military maneuvers to execute successfully. They require timing, logistics, reserve management, communications discipline, intelligence preparation, and synchronized battlefield coordination. Ukraine appears to have achieved all of those simultaneously. The result was not just a tactical victory, it was an operational shock. Russian military bloggers reacted with visible alarm. Several openly questioned how an offensive force with numerical advantages and momentum collapsed so quickly once Ukraine launched a coordinated counterstroke. And that raises the most important question: what happens next? Russia now faces several bad options. It can attempt to resume offensive operations around Pokrovsk despite severe manpower and equipment losses. It can shift to defensive consolidation and attempt to stabilise the front. Or it can pursue negotiations from a weakened operational position. None of those options represent strategic success. And perhaps the biggest lesson from Pokrovsk is this: wars are not decided only by attrition. They are decided by operational adaptability. For nearly 2 years, Russia relied heavily on grinding assaults built around artillery mass, numerical pressure, and incremental territorial gains. At Pokrovsk, Ukraine exploited the weaknesses of that model. Russian forces advanced deep into contested territory while stretching logistics and exposing their flanks. Then, Ukraine struck at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The result was one of the most damaging Russian battlefield defeats of 2026. And if Ukraine can repeat this type of operation elsewhere along the front, then the broader strategic balance of the war may look very different than many analysts assumed only months ago. If this analysis gave you a deeper understanding of how operational warfare actually works, subscribe to the channel. We focus on military strategy, battlefield analysis, satellite verification, and casualty assessment, not sensationalism. And if this video changed your perspective on the war, leave a comment below. What surprised you most about the Pokrovsk encirclement? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.